This is Professor Spehar from the University of Alaska Southeast. This is a lecture on ecological economics, Chapter 4, Nature of Resources and the Resources of Nature, from the textbook Ecological Economics, Principles and Applications. This is Part 2. In Part 2, we will define and describe scarce factors of production using the vernacular of stock flow and fund service resources, and apply excludability and rivalness to these scarce resources. We will be using these terms in Chapter 9, 10, and beyond. And we will apply this new vernacular to specific types of scarce goods and services provided by the sustaining system, all of which will help us later to understand the often ignored real costs of economic growth. Conventional economics uses the term factors of production to describe the inputs to the production process that are necessary to produce the outputs. The resources needed for firms, called the factors of production, include land, labor, and capital, as well as entrepreneurial ability. Labor and entrepreneurial ability is what you would imagine: households offering their services to firms in exchange for wages as compensation for their talents and ability. Land is anything that a firm needs that comes from land: raw materials, timber, wheat, flour, water, oil, building site. The income that an owner of land receives is called rent. Capital, on the other hand, in the economic sense, not in the financial sense, includes buildings, computers, tractors, any equipment or machinery, desks, etc. The income received from capital is often called interest. This idea of factors of production ignore a fundamental uniqueness of some types of scarce resources, that of stock flow and fund service resources. But in ecological economics, we use these terms to distinguish between two fundamentally different types of resources used as inputs or as factors of production. Let's take an example. Let's take the example of a cook and kitchen that makes espresso and bakery items. The cook and the kitchen are not used up in the production process, maybe a bit worn out, but they are still the same before and after making donuts and coffee. This is not true of the raw items used to make donuts and coffee. The raw items, coffee beans, flour, sugar, spices, used for donuts, are transformed into a donut, and after consumption are thereafter turned into waste. You can think of the cook, kitchen, and raw materials as a cause that results in coffee and donuts. But these forces that act together to make donuts and coffee are fundamentally different. Now, this is not a new idea. Aristotle, a philosopher who lived in 384 to 322 BC, categorized these two causative forces as material cause, that which is transformed, and efficient cause, that which causes transformation but itself is not transformed in the process. Raw materials are raw ingredients, and they are the material causes. The cook and the kitchen, they're efficient causes. Coffee beans, flour, sugar, spices are stock flow, or material causes, whereas the oven, cook, and kitchen are fund service, or efficient causes. So how would you go about determining whether it was a stock flow resource? How would you determine whether a factor of production is a material cause or stock flow resource? Well, you would need to ask the following questions. Are the resources materially transformed into what they produce? If so, then it's a material cause. Can they be used at virtually any rate desired? Subject, of course, to the availability of the fund service resource required for the transformation. Can their productivity be measured by the number of physical units of the product into which they're transformed? Can they be stockpiled? And are they used up and not worn out? So examples would be coffee, donuts, fossil fuels, copper, etc. But you would need to ask the above questions. A fund service resource may suffer wear and tear during production, but it does not become a part of what is being produced. It provides a service at a fixed rate, and the unit for measuring that service is in physical output per unit of time. The service from a fund can't be stockpiled for future use and can't be used up. What kind of questions do you ask for a fund service resource? Well, you would need to ask questions such as, are they unaffected by the product that is being produced? If they are not materially transformed into what they produce, then they are a fund service and an efficient cause. Are they only used at a given rate per unit of time? Do you measure their productivity as output per unit of time? Are they stockpiled? If they cannot be stockpiled, they're a fund service resource. Do they wear out, or are they used up? If they wear out, they're a fund service resource. So examples might include labor used in production, capital in the form of buildings, a bicycle needed for transportation to work. Even sunlight could be considered a fund service, as it is a service provided by nature that helps to produce produce. Box 4.1 in your textbook captures the definition of stock flow and fund service resources. It's important to note that in the academic literature, there are many distinct definitions for stocks, flows, funds, and services. So to be clear here, we are discussing the specific definitions given and provided. So for future reference, we will be referring to stock flow and fund service resources according to the following characteristics. Stock flow resources are materially transformed into what they produce, material cause, can be used at virtually any rate desired, can be stockpiled, are used up, and not worn out. Fund service resources are not materially transformed into what they produce, efficient cause, can only be used at a given rate, and their productivity is measured as output per unit of time. They cannot be stockpiled, and they are worn out and not used up. Now we turn to the concepts of excludability and rivalness. We cover these concepts in much more detail later. Here we're providing an introduction. This should be a review for many who have taken principles of economic courses. They will be crucial concepts for later economic analysis, and it should be mentioned that they are discussed and applied in depth in many of the traditional natural resource and environmental economic courses. But these terms are not discussed in the traditional courses as they relate to the fundamental distinctions between stock flow or fund service resources. It turns out that rivalness is closely related to both stock flow and fund service distinctions. These terms and their distinctions will become important in Chapter 10. Let's talk about excludability. This is a legal concept that, when enforced, allows an owner to prevent others from using his or her asset. An excludable resource is one whose ownership allows the owner to use it while simultaneously denying others the privilege. I can own my house and prevent others from using it. It's excludable. I can own an oil field and prevent others from accessing the oil. The oil field is excludable. I cannot prevent you from accessing the safety of our military force once the military is in place, nor can I prevent you from enjoying the fireworks of my display on the 4th of July. These are examples of non-excludability. Rivalness, on the other hand, is an inherent characteristic of certain resources. It's not related to a legal concept. Again, an inherent characteristic, whereby consumption or use by one person reduces the amount available for everyone else. A rival resource is one whose use by one person precludes use by another. A non-rival resource is one whose use by one person does not affect its use by another. So, for example, a national park may be considered non-rival, that is, until it becomes too crowded. Non-rival goods may be consumed by one consumer without preventing simultaneous consumption by another. An example might be radio waves. You can consume radio waves and not harm anyone else from accessing them as well. That is, you don't consume radio waves, thereby preventing anyone else from consuming the exact same radio waves. Almost all private goods are rivalrous. My bike is rivalrous. While I am using it, you cannot. Let's go through a number of examples to try to get a better feel for some of these terms. Fossil fuels. For practical purposes, fossil fuels are a non-renewable source of low-entropy energy. They are also very important as material building blocks. These are stock that are subject to change or subject to a rate of usage or extraction and is typically a rival good. Minerals. The earth provides fixed stocks of the basic elements in various combinations and degrees of purity, which we simply refer to here as minerals. This is raw material that economic activity and even life itself ultimately depends. We will refer to mineral resources and fossil fuels together as non-renewable resources. And the first 5 goods and services in this list are abiotic resources and are discussed in Chapter 5. Solar energy is a non-rival fund service. The sustaining system provides solar energy, the ultimate source of low entropy upon which the entire system depends. Renewable resources. Life is able to harness solar energy to organize water and basic elements into more useful structures, at least from the human perspective, that we can use as raw materials in the economic process. Only photosynthesizing organisms are capable of achieving this directly, and virtually all other organisms, including humans, depend on these primary producers. These biological resources are traditionally referred to as renewable resources, but in fact they are only renewable if extracted more slowly than the rate at which they reproduce. Clearly, species can be exploited to extinction, so as we will see, biological resources are exhaustible in a way that mineral resources are not. Now, ecosystem services. These are living species that interact to create very complex ecosystems, and these ecosystems generate ecosystem functions. When functions are of use to humans, we refer to them as ecosystem services. Many of these ecosystem services are essential to our survival. Waste absorption. Waste absorption. Ecosystems process waste, render it harmless to humans, and in many cases, again, make it available to renewable resource stocks as a raw material input. This is really a specific type of ecosystem service, but one whose economic characteristics make it worth classifying on its own. We refer to these last 3 goods and services as biotic resources, and they're discussed in Chapter 6. Finally, stock resources are resources that can be permanently extended and are therefore non-renewable, and whose quantity are usually expressed in absolute amounts rather than in rates. Examples are coal and petroleum deposits, fossil fuels, and minerals. Flow resources, on the other hand, are not permanently expendable. That is, they are renewable under certain circumstances. They are resources that are replaced. They are commonly expressed in annual rates at which they are regenerated. Examples are fresh water runoff and timber. All stock flow resources are rival, and note that material cause is always stock flow in nature. Fund service. Note that all non-rival goods are fund service. Solar energy, ecosystem services, renewable resources are fund service. Here's a good exercise. Think about a specific ecosystem service. Make a list of 3 stock flow resources provided by or found in that ecosystem and 3 fund service resources. You will have to be very specific about the use of each resource. For example, drinking water is a stock flow, whereas water for swimming is a fund service. You might want to play this classification game. I can provide a few hints to help you along. 1. All stock flow resources are rival. This is true. You might want to ask yourself why. All rival goods are stock flow resource. This is false. All non-rival goods are fund service. This is true. Finally, all fund service goods are non-rival, and this is false. You might want to explain to yourself why. Now, I have to say it is true that some fund service goods are rival, but only because they can be made excludable by law. For example, a hot springs provides the service of warm bathing. At least within our conception of property rights, one could buy the land surrounding the springs and fence them off, thereby excluding anyone else from receiving the service of the spring. Also, it's good to note that all ecosystem services are non-excludable. This is true, but they can potentially be made excludable again by law. Ecosystem services are the benefits people obtain from ecosystems, and many of these services are provided outside the borders of the land where they're produced. These are non-renewable ecosystem services such as pollination of bees by beekeepers. We'll talk a lot more about this later. Examples of non-rival are fresh air, pollination, and these are fund services. Here are some examples of rival goods: gold, land, bicycles, a weed whacker, computers, houses, farms, cherries. These are all rival goods. If I use them, you cannot. Typically excluded as well. I can prevent your access to all of them. I will leave you with just a few more examples provided here. Can you look at this matrix and identify which are stock flow goods and which are fund service? This concludes the lecture, and I leave you with just a few big ideas to remember. Our next lecture that follows is on market failures, public goods, externalities, and it will include discussions on goods that have attributes of excludability and rivalness. Until then, this is Professor Spihar.